I think we're live. I think this is it. I think this is it. And welcome. By the way, before we dive in, I got to tell you, this is the very first YouTube live that I've ever done. So at the moment, I don't really know how this is going to work. This could be a terrible, unmitigated disaster. But maybe it might just work. And at the moment, as we're talking, I am literally looking to see whether on my YouTube screen it's also gone live. And yes, it has. Okay, fine. So I know we're live now and I can see that people are tuning in and watching. I don't know how the comments things work. I'm going to get smoother at this. I know that for sure. But drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But more importantly, just so that I know that you're there and you're listening, drop a comment and let me know, even if it's just a hi, hello. And that will make me realize that I'm not talking to the ether. There are real people tuning in. And I'm super excited to be doing this. And I think the reason why is I spend a lot of time, and I know I haven't done it of late. Hi, Julian. Good to see you. Hello, Emma. I put a lot of time and effort into the YouTubes that go out. A lot of editing goes in, a lot of thinking about it. But one of the problems about it is it lacks interaction and it lacks a little bit of feedback. And sometimes people pop on and, ask questions like, well, what about this or what about that? I don't really always have the time to write full responses or to find out what people who are tuning in really want help with. So I decided a little while ago, and then life got in the way, but I'm back on it, to do some lives like this and really to provide a way of interacting with people who are tuning in, people who are following, to get all the information that they need about beating anxiety, becoming free from anxiety. Or if there are other issues going on, whether there's issues relating to self or procrastination or anywhere in life where anxiety feels like it's perhaps impacting your life in some way, whether that's sleep, confidence, this is a place where I really want to begin to create an interactive chat where people can also look back and see, get benefit from the questions and interactions that we're having. Hello, keep the beat forever. Oh, I love that. Keep the beat forever. So if you're tuning in, then feel free to start. If you've got any questions that you're hoping to get out of this, then please do let me know. Someone's already said I've got generalized anxiety disorder. So that's something that I'll share some thoughts around that a little bit later. I thought, given that this is the very first one that I'm doing, and by the way, I don't know how long I'm going to talk for. It's probably not going to be more than 17 hours. No. Probably, I reckon somewhere between half an hour to 45 minutes, that kind of time. If there are great questions and we're in a groove, I'll keep going, not clock watching, but I want this to provide a useful conversation. Werner, hello, good to see you. I'm pleased you could join. So here's how I thought we'd start. I thought for those tuning in, I would give you a little bit of background for 5 minutes or so, just a little bit about me, what I've been doing, what leads me to being Howard Cooper's Rapid Change Works, and really why I'm so passionate. I really am about helping people to beat anxiety and even to understand it better and become free of it. And it's a personal battle. And the reason is this. When I was 15 years old, I was diagnosed with a severe anxiety and panic attack disorder. And I really had pretty much every unpleasant feeling of anxiety or manifestation of it that I've come across. So I had depersonalization, where I felt like I was out of my body. Nothing felt real, so they call that derealization. I was having regular panic attacks. I had air hunger. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I became pretty much phobic of everything. With agoraphobia, I couldn't leave the house. My parents were incredibly worried about me. They didn't know what they were going to do. And I was sent to doctors who eventually sent me to a psychiatrist who put me on antidepressants. And I just remember thinking, why am I on being put on antidepressants? I'm not depressed. I just feel really lousy and feel really fed up of feeling anxious. And I think often people are put on antidepressants and labeled depressed when actually what they are labeled, what they are feeling is not depressed. They're feeling fed up of feeling anxious. And they feel like there's no hope of getting out of the anxiety. But they're not depressed. And I think there is a distinction. But that was kind of how I felt at the time. And I was sent to a very nice lady, and I really liked her, very well intentioned, who was a psychotherapist, and spent week in, week out for about 3.5 years chatting about why was I like this and what were the issues that were going on that perhaps created the anxiety. What was my past? Looking for root cause, all that kind of traditional stuff. The problem is this: after about 3.5 years, week in, week out, I had this like monumental session, and I finally got her theory as to why I was like I was. The problem is I wasn't really any better, right? I think time had healed to some degree. I had grown up a little bit, but by and large, not a huge amount of change. I still was anxious. I still had panic attacks. And I think I had this realization of, hold on a moment, like the whole thing for 3.5 years seems to have been about like trying to understand why I am like I am. But where are the strategies? Like, how could I change this? And most people that I've worked with these days, they don't really care why. They just want help. They want to be out of suffering. And I think the focus was not there for me when I was going through this. It seemed all about why rather than, and I'll be honest, I remember sessions and it was like, how was your week? Yeah, I feel pretty shit. And how do you feel about feeling shit? Well, I felt pretty shit. And I couldn't quite work out how this was going to help. But after that experience, I realized I got to find some other methods of change. So I came across the world of NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, and hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And over the years, because, by the way, that stuff seemed to be more solution-focused and helped me far more than anything had previously, I then became very passionate. How could I help other people? So I trained up. I spent now 20 years working, over 20 years, with people specializing in anxiety. And my focus is always not on why are we like we are, but much more on how can we change the patterns, right? And I think that's something that I think I feel really passionate about, right? Having people get strategies that are going to lead to relief rather than just analytical understanding of root cause. And I think, that's kind of important. I've been very lucky as well. I spent 2 years as the lead presenter with Virgin Atlantic on their Flying Without Fear course. So once every month, I was taking 100 terrified flyers, talking to them for a couple of hours, and then I'd get on a plane with them. So I used to joke that I've got to be good at what I do because I don't want to be on a plane with 100 people who are freaking out. It really is that simple. But having said all that, I'm now in my, as I said, 21st year of working with people. And here's a flavor of the sort of things that I'll see. So, and I say this simply because this is an invitation. If there are things that you're going through that you can resonate with as I talk about these things, then let me know in the boxes so that I know what to sort of focus this session on. I'll see a lot of people with anxiety, like health anxiety. That seems to be a big one at the moment. And health anxiety is, of course, that thing where someone gets a headache, but instead of it being a headache for them, they are absolutely convinced it's a tumor or it's something serious, and they end up having to go for medical tests, and the doctor reassures them, and they get the all clear from the medical profession, but they can't let go of that. Or they let go of that, and immediately they have some other manifestation of health worries that appear, and it becomes intrusive. So that, along with things like intrusive thoughts. I see a lot of people with air hunger. So that feeling that they can't take enough, a big satisfying breath in. I see people for all sorts of fears and phobias. So flying, obviously, heights. But then you've got kind of more existential type stuff or conceptual worries. Like people get anxious about what might happen or uncertainty. Or people dealing with trauma or traumatic things that have happened and the way that manifests. Or people anxious and they're not sleeping well. So these are all the areas that I tend to work up with day in, day out. Emma Jane says, agree, digging the past doesn't help. I totally agree. And I think one of the things that happens is when you dig up, you start digging up the past, what the intention is you're kind of looking for some root cause. But what if there isn't a root cause? And I fundamentally don't agree that there is a root cause. This whole root cause malarkey is a misstep, and actually can lead to people being much more trapped in anxiety. Because here's what happens: if there isn't really a root cause, but you'll go to see a therapist who leads you to believe that there is a root cause, you might not get any benefit from the therapy, but you might leave with that fixation of, I need to uncover the root cause in order to get better. Which is dangerous, because if there isn't a root cause, now you're on the never-ending hunt. How can you possibly deal with it? Now, I'm in the process of writing a book, and I've actually recently been looking at this chapter where I kind of expose the idea of the misstep about the root cause. So let me share this with you now. I remember years ago dealing with someone who they were absolutely fine flying, and then they got to 16, and then they had a turbulent flight, and then they became anxious, terrified of flying for another 15 years. And then they saw me and they said, well, I was fine, turbulent flight at 16, and then I was terrified and phobic. Now, that would seem on the face of it, would it not, like that's a really clear-cut root cause? That would be like simple, right? It's just turbulent flight, and now they've got anxiety. But I think it's not as clear-cut as this. And the reason why is as follows. How many people were on that flight when he was 16 and it was turbulent? 200 people? 250 passengers? Did they all become phobic? I doubt that. I suspect there was likely some that did, some that became mildly anxious, but some that just was like, it's normal turbulence, it doesn't bother me. So the question is if the turbulent flight causes people to become anxious, why didn't everyone get it? And then you might say, well, that's because, he responded in that way, not everyone did. But why did he respond in that way? Well, maybe his brain was kind of wired up because of stuff that's happened previously to that, to be more susceptible to responding to turbulence as though it's a threat. And suddenly you start sort of rewinding this and going, well, what was it that caused his brain to be primed to respond to that as a threat? Well, maybe it was something else that happened at 12. And maybe the thing that primed that was when he was 10. But each one of these things, it's like trying to find water, hold water. It just slips through. And I don't think there is a single root cause. If you want a root cause, it's you're human. And everything that's ever happened to you has likely wired up your brain in certain ways. But the idea that we can find or pinpoint that one thing that was the domino effect, I think it's a misstep and can, in many cases, lead people to feeling trapped. Let's just have a look at some of the comments here. So someone obviously talked about generalized anxiety disorder. Julian says, yep, for me it's health, flying and agoraphobia, feeling trapped. I can't have people around to my house. Okay, all right. So, right, let's look at some of these in a little bit more detail, okay? I have a YouTube video, and if you haven't seen it, and this is really for John Casey, who made the comment. I had a YouTube video, and I think it was a bit too provocative. I think some people got a bit like, hold on a moment, don't be ridiculous. And it was called "You Don't Have Generalized Anxiety Disorder." And I'm not a big fan of the label generalized anxiety disorder. I think that the label itself is very unhelpful. And here's why. If you go to the doctors and you tell them essentially that you are anxious, and you name 2 or 3 things that you're anxious about, and you say that you've been doing these anxieties for more than, and I can't remember what it is, according to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's like 2 or 3 weeks or a couple of months. If you've been doing it for a prolonged period of time, might be 6 weeks, they say, you have generalized anxiety disorder. The problem is then people start going, I have generalized anxiety disorder. And it almost kind of puts them into the position where in their mind, it's like there's nothing I can do now. I have a disorder. And it's generalized, it's everywhere. And the narrative that people get into is things like, I'm just anxious about everything. It's generalized to everywhere. The reality is I don't think people have generalized anxiety. I think they have one or two things that are anxious, that are triggering their anxiety, and they do it a lot. They do the pattern a lot. But I think being anxious about one or two things that you do a lot is not the same as being anxious about everything. So I'm always very wary when anyone says, like, I have generalized anxiety. I think it's an unhelpful frame for you. And I offer that simply as an invitation to begin to challenge that thinking. Because it's like when people say, everything makes me anxious. That can't be true. I'm like, really? Pink marshmallows. Like, if you're okay with pink marshmallows, that's not everything. So it's unlikely to be everything makes me anxious except pink marshmallows, right? If that makes sense. So then the question is, well, what specifically is making me anxious? And it's kind of funny because one of the big things that happened for me in terms of becoming free of anxiety is getting curious, getting really curious. And what I mean by getting curious is this. And look, I've got like, I think 10 of you watching live currently, and I know loads of people will watch the replay of this. So here's something to begin to think about. And I'll tell you where I'm going with this in a moment. When you get dressed in the morning, what order do you get dressed in? Right? When you get dressed in the morning, what order do you get dressed in? And some people, when you do that in your mind, go, oh, I don't even know. I'm not even sure what order I get dressed in. For me, it's top half on first, walk around, nothing on down below. Don't make mental images. But that's just the way I do it. Right? And the reason I do it that way is it's a habit. But there has to be a process from being naked to being dressed. There's a sequence. If you said to a friend, if you asked them that question, what order do you get dressed in the morning? How would you respond if they went, there's no order. I'm naked and then dressed. You'd likely look at them like they were a bit crazy and go, no, like you've missed out some steps. The reason I'm sharing this idea with you is as follows. People often feel like they are struck down by anxiety. They're a victim to it. It just happens outside of their control and for no apparent reason, more often than not. And they can feel that way. I just get anxious, they say. But saying you just get anxious is a little bit like saying I'm naked and then dressed. Like there's some steps that are being missed out. Now, when I say get curious, what I really mean is, can you begin to get curious about the specific images in your mind or the words that you're saying to yourself or the sensations in your body that you're responding to as though they're a threat? That, for me, is the thing that I began to look at. So rather than me just going, well, I just feel anxious, there's nothing I can do about it, I began to go, just before I got anxious, what specifically was the image or the word or the sensation that I interpreted as a threat? And as I've been saying this, I just noticed Emma has just popped up and said, let me see if I can put this on the screen. Oh, there we go. There we go. I know I'm anxious because I overreact to my... It's gone. I knew there'd be some teething trouble with this. Let's see. There you go. I know I'm anxious because I overreact to my body sensations. It's just learning to go with it. That's the hard bit. Also, the overwhelming fatigue that goes with it. Yeah, I mean, look, dealing with anxiety can be really flipping tiring because it feels often like every day is just an ongoing battle, right? But I like what you've said, because what you've said is you've identified you're likely overreacting to your body's sensations. So that's a very specific thing. You might even get curious about where are those sensations coming from, because the sensations can often be a response to images or words in your head first. And if you can kind of uncover that, you can head off the sensations. That's one way. The other thing that you can do is when you notice what sensations are being triggered or are triggering you, you can begin to see if you can separate out in your mind the sensation from the meaning, your interpretation of the sensation. So a good example of this is as follows. If I feel my heart racing, what does that tell us? Because a lot of people will say, well, it tells you that you're anxious, but it doesn't. The only thing the feeling of your heart racing tells you is that your heart's racing. That's kind of it. However, humans like making story and creating meaning. So if I feel my heart racing and see a beautiful woman in the distance, my brain, which likes making meaning, is going to go, beautiful woman plus heart racing equals attraction, arousal, excitement. Ooh. However, if I see a spider run out across the kitchen floor and feel heart racing, I don't go and ask the spider out on a date, right? I likely have a different interpretation. I go, spider plus heart racing equals fear. Or if I go up one flight of stairs and feel this, I likely have a different story again. Like, I'm unfit, I should go to the gym more. But the feeling by itself doesn't tell me that. It's just a sensation. I have to add some story to it. Now, I share this as just a nudge in the direction of if you are overreacting to sensations, it's likely that you are adding a meaning or a story or a thought to that sensation, which is causing the interpretation of threat. So if you can go back and get really curious about what is that thought that you're adding, that can really help. That can form the basis of some useful directions. I've just seen John Craggs. Hello indeed. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Yeah. Julian. There we go. Says, as we said, it's health, flying, and agoraphobia. Right. I think here's the thing, and I sometimes struggle with something. Because sometimes people will say, well, I have a fear of flying, right? And we'll do some work around it. And they go, have you got any tips for a fear of dogs or a fear of heights or a fear of... The problem I have is that if you look structurally, it's often the same pattern. The same pattern is we are likely engaging in or creating certain thoughts in our mind that we're interpreting as a threat. Whether that's the thought of, like, what if the plane crashes? Or whether it's the thought of, what if I have this terrible disease? Or what if it's the thought of, what if I panic? It's often the same pattern. And again, that's one of the reasons why I don't like the term generalized anxiety, because often you can sort of boil the whole thing down to simply getting caught up in some unhelpful thinking. Unfortunately, there are three things that more often than not, people are told to do, which I really don't think helps. I.e., like if I had anxiety, what's the person down the street likely going to say to me to help? It's going to be some version of, and I guarantee if you've had or struggled with anxiety, I guarantee you've been told one of these three things before, all right? It's going to be some version of, take some deep breaths, just do positive thinking, or just distract yourself, don't think about it. And often people will tell us that sort of stuff, and they really mean well. They are genuinely well-intentioned human beings, and that's great, and we love them for their intention. However, that stuff doesn't tend to work, and in many ways can make us worse. And here's why. Imagine you in a room with a tiger, and the tiger was getting closer and closer to you, and it began to raise its claws and was going to strike you. At the moment that it raised its claws and you knew for certain this was like imminent death, there was nothing you could do about it. Be honest, how effective would it be if someone just said, just distract yourself and do the crossword. Like, of course that wouldn't work. Of course that wouldn't help. Because at that moment in time, your body, your mind, that mind-body system would be responding to what it thinks is a primal threat. And the same with things like thinking positive. Tiger's about to attack you. What are you supposed to think? Think positive? Like, I'm sure my flesh will be tasty to the tiger. Like, that's not going to help. And I think part of this is if the only things that we've been given are things like think positive, distract yourself, or take some deep breaths, and then you try doing those things and you struggle with them, I've noticed people tend not to go, you know what, I've been given some really shitty techniques. These things do not work. People tend to often reflect them in on themselves. They go, oh, like, people keep giving me this advice, but I can't do it. I'm a failure. I'm not able to deal with this effectively. So now they have anxiety, but also they start doing lots of self-rating. Like, I'm no good as a human being. I can't cope. And actually, it's just that they were given like the wrong tools. And I think that's kind of a useful thing to realize. The problem is that a lot of those tools that we're given, things like think positive, or you have to think positive. In other words, you mustn't have negative thoughts, or distract yourself, don't think about it. I think one of the problems is that it actually implies there's a threat. And the best analogy I have to help explain this is one that I've used so many times, and forgive me if you've heard this before, but I love it, is if my son came running into my bedroom one night and said, Daddy, Daddy, there's a monster under my bed. Be honest, how effective would it be if I said, George, there's no monster, but whatever you do, don't look it in the eye. At that moment of telling him he mustn't look it in the eye, his heart would start pounding. Why? Because in telling him he mustn't see it, it adds credibility to it. If you are saying to yourself, I mustn't have these thoughts, your brain unconsciously is going, well, why not? What's wrong with having those thoughts of these thoughts? Are these thoughts dangerous? Crikey, better put a big red flag of danger in that thought. Now, what's going to keep popping back up more often? Those thoughts. Why? Because your brain at some level is a survival mechanism. It wants to keep you safe. So it's going to mark out the stuff that it thinks is a threat as significant, and it's going to start kind of like putting stuff up more often because it seems like a threat on the radar. So that's one of the things that I think this is about, getting out of the catch-22 situation of getting rid of these thoughts and being okay having them. Helps to see that it's just stuff that you're thinking and it's not actually happening. John says, as an actor, I get anxious about the outcome of an audition, wondering if I will hear either way about whether I'll get the job or not, and that's when the anxiety sets in. And then he goes on, I've recently had a very bad bout of IBS and recently had a test to rule out other health conditions. All is clear. I tend to feel it's my anxiety which has contributed to this. Right. So it's interesting because IBS and stomach-related stuff is often one of the ways in which anxiety can manifest. If you think about it, if you are waylaid, I'm going to get crude now, if you have a lot of shit inside of you and you were attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, right, the body doesn't want to be spending a lot of energy trying to absorb all the nutrients in the food and digest stuff, clogging up the system. It wants all the energy to fight or flight. So that's the priority. So sometimes the body will just go, right, abort, and we have runny tummy, we have digestive issues because the tummy is just the body's in a state of high alert, and your body goes into preparing to fight or flight, right? The problem is that when people have that experience, then instead of marking it as like, right, I'm having anxiety, this is kind of a normal response to anxiety, people, if you have a tendency towards anxiety, can start going into patterns of, oh God, now I've got stomach issues. What does this mean? What if I can't get over it? And so on. Which then, ironically, makes the whole thing worse, tension, and the stomach issues continue. But I think it's useful to kind of begin to see that, like, it can be just a normal manifestation of anxiety and doesn't mean anything more serious. I think the other thing is this, and it's kind of useful to think about the catch-22 situation. As a hypnotist, one of the things that we do is use what's called a hypnotic loop. So if you see a stage hypnotist, what they'll likely do is do something where they'll give you a physical sensation of something happening, and your brain goes, "Oh, I can feel that," which encourages you to get more absorbed into whatever imagined scenario they're creating. And when they get more absorbed into the imagined scenario they're creating, they have more of the physical sensations. But this happens too with anxiety. And this is really kind of the anxiety loop. So let's use an example of fear of flying. Right? It's a nice, easy example. Let's imagine before a flight, I suddenly have the thought, like, what if we crashed? Oh! And I had this mental image, and I looked at the mental image of what if we crashed, and I got a bit too caught up in it, a bit too lost in that thought, and forgot that I was thinking it. Likely my body would then feel anxious because I was treating it as real. My body would feel anxious, and then, because my body felt anxious, I would go, oh my word, I really do have a real feeling of anxiety. What does it tell me? I think this real feeling is telling me that this thought is real. I don't like that. If that thought's real, I'm going to feel even worse. So then they feel worse. And the worse they feel, the more real they attribute this mental thought. And they go back and forwards. It becomes a loop and it spirals into something unmanageable. And then it looks as though the only way to be free is to get rid of the thought, or to get rid of this idea. And I think that is kind of the anxiety loop that most people get caught in some capacity. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. And it also explains why a lot of people end up perpetuating stuff, because... So I for years had this idea, and I it's certainly borne out in my clinical experience too, working with people, and I hope this makes some sense to you. There's probably a deeper YouTube full of form to share on this topic. That the perceived solution that you think you need is the problem. I'll say that again because it's a little strange to get your head around. The perceived solution people think they need is more often than not the problem itself. Let me explain. If someone comes in and says, for example, Howard, I'm having these terrible thoughts of flying coming up, and it's making me feel anxious. Howard, you have to get rid of all of this thinking and these anxious feelings and all of these terrible thoughts. That's their perceived solution. Their solution is, I have to get rid of it, or they have to get rid of these thoughts. The problem is that the act of trying to get rid of them marks them out as a threat and forces the brain to start creating more meaning and interpreting them as dangerous, which means that they pop up more often. In other words, their solution of trying to get rid of the thought is the thing that's causing it to become a problem and come up more often. And almost always, the solution that you have for anxiety is the problem. And that's why I sort of cryptically posted one time on my Facebook feed many years ago. And people were like, what? Something along the lines of the trick to dealing with, what was it? The ultimate way to beat anxiety is to be willing to have it. And if we dive in that just a touch more, here's what I mean. I'll have people who will say to me things like, and I know I keep talking about fear of flying, it's just the example that's popping into my head. But I've had people who will say things like, make me like all the people who are okay flying, who never have a negative thought about flying. And I'll be like, really? And I give them homework. I say, go and find someone who's okay flying and ask them, have you ever had a negative thought about flying? And you know what they'll all say? They'll all say, well, of course. Like most people who fly fine have also had negative thoughts about flying. Like, what if we crashed? What if there was engine failure? What if this happened? What if that happened? And then you get curious. You go, all right then, tell me, what technique do you use when those negative thoughts come up in order so that you don't freak out or have terrible anxiety? What technique? And they'll all react the same way. They'll do this. They'll go, because it never even struck them that they had to do anything with the thought. It was like a negative thought came up. They just knew they were thinking, making shit up, and then they kind of just moved on. And that is kind of the issue, right? If you come in and you say you have to make it so that no negative thoughts appear, I must only think positive, that itself is a problem. That mindset of I must only think positive. And this is why, I often get on my high horse, my soapbox about toxic positivity. I see it all over social media. We must be positive all the time. We have to be love and light. And it's like, no, like we can also be bored and down. And like, I want people to have what I would call an integrated change. I want them to be able to have a full gamut of emotions, good and bad, without jumping to the conclusions or labeling themselves as ill or problematic. Emma says, can't plan a route without knowing all my toilet stops, which rules out car journeys. Yeah. And again, if you get very absorbed into the thought of like, oh God, what if I need the toilet? The tension in that whole area that comes from getting concerned about it causes more frequent urination and frequent movements in that way. And yeah, I mean, it also happens with age. I am sadly getting to that age where I've begun to wake up in the middle of the night needing to pee. And I'm going to have to do something about that because that doesn't, not good, not good. I'm told it's normal though for someone who's over 30-10. So yeah, we'll see. But I'm just checking the time. We've been chatting for about 37 minutes. Is there anything specific? Because I'd like to finish, by the way. Yeah, John Craig says ditto. Yeah. I would like to give you a very specific, practical thing that you can do, right? Just to begin to, because I hate the idea. I know I've been talking and waffling about all sorts of theories and ideas, but I would like to give you a practical exercise that you can do. And it's so simple, and I refer to this as the unplug anxiety hack. And by the way, if you've got any questions or comments, please do let me know in the comment. Also, liking, commenting, and sharing the video and subscribing to the channel. It actually, the way the YouTube algorithm works, as I'm learning, is that's the thing that lets people know that it lets YouTube know that this is a video worth sharing and putting up, so that when people are searching for anxiety help, if more people like it, they're more likely to show this kind of content and my content up first. So if you've enjoyed it and if you're getting value from it, then do give me a like, do share it, do comment. That really, really helps get the message out. Thank you for that. Okay, so here's the unplug anxiety hack. And you can try this yourself. So come up now in your mind with one of the what if scenarios that maybe you've been worrying about. So it might be, what if I get ill, or what if the plane is delayed, or what if I lose my job? And so come up with that what if statement, right? And then close your eyes and just have the thought, like, what if? And notice as you sit with that and as you think it, notice how you feel, right? So go ahead and do that and just notice. And now I'm going to have you do the same thing, but with one subtle difference. I'd like you to go and have the same thought, but this time, in your mind, say to yourself, I'm just having the thought, what if XYZ happens? Obviously, you're inserting that thing that you're worried about. But you have the phrase, I'm just experiencing the thought, what if this thing happens? And I want you to notice what's different. What's the feeling? What feeling is different between what if this happens and I'm just experiencing the thought, what if this happens? And I'd love to hear in the comments, what's different for you about doing that and trying that on? And share in the comments what the difference is. There is, by the way, like a 30-second delay between me saying this stuff and you getting it. So if I'm pausing, it's because I want to see what you're actually saying as you experience this. And it's not always instant feedback. So, right. Absolutely. So Emma says, disconnecting the reality. Yeah. People, it's a very common experience that people will often say. It's almost like kind of just stepping back and reminding yourself that this is not actually happening. Yeah, John, it breaks the reality of it. Yeah. Now, the reality of it is you can apply this to all sorts of things. But if ever you're feeling anxious, unplugging it by reminding yourself, no, I'm experiencing the thought. What if this happens? I've used this very successfully with people who are like really depressed, and they have like perhaps a story like I'm worthless. There's a big difference between having the thought I'm worthless, between saying to yourself, sorry, I'm worthless, and going, I'm just experiencing a thought I'm worthless. These are very different things. But this is a very useful thing that I want you to begin to play around with, and I invite you to explore. And Emma, you mentioned about the sensations. What if it's I'm just experiencing a sensation of tension in the stomach? That's something that's really useful. And by the way, when I say tension in the stomach, we've got to be careful about the way we label sensations. I would invite anyone who's overreacting to sensations to get sensory specific. And what I mean by that is people will often say things like, well, I have a sensation of anxiety. But what actually is the sensation of anxiety? I would break it down into component parts. Is it tension in the chest, sweaty palms, racing heartbeat, a feeling of pressure somewhere? And begin to focus on not just the label that you give all of these sensations of anxiety, but get sensory specific so that you can begin to think, no, I'm just experiencing a sensation of heart racing. I'm just experiencing the sensation of knot in stomach. I'm just experiencing the sensation of moisture in hands. That again can help disconnect from the overwhelm and the overreacting to sensations as well. Right, let's take one more before we kind of finish up. Because look, this is. I'm really pleased, by the way, that people have been on and asking questions. For me, this is really great, and it makes me want to do this more often as well. Sorry, I've just lost that. There you go. Please, can you suggest how to combat the overthinking of whether I will get that job or not? No easy solution, I guess. Right. Yeah. Okay. This, kind of brings us on to a whole other topic that likely I will cover on some future lives. But quickly put, I think we often have rules about how we think things have to be. Right? So Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavioral therapy, he refers to it as masturbation. Not to be confused with that other thing. But ovation, musts, shoulds, have tos. And often if we have rules about how things have to be, we have a lot of tension in our body. So, for example, if I said to everyone, close your eyes right now, in fact, try this, close your eyes and say to yourself, I must relax right now. I must relax immediately. Notice how it feels to demand that of yourself. I must relax. And then change the words instead to, I'd like to relax. I'd like to relax. And notice the difference. And notice the difference. Likely, the thought, I must relax, it has tension because it's a demand. Whereas I'd like to relax probably feels a little easier. The thing is with I'd like to relax, there's an acceptance that you might not. And by the way, if you think about it, this is why a lot of people, even people who don't struggle to sleep, will be, I don't struggle to sleep, apart from when I've got something important the next day. And I say to myself, it doesn't matter normally, but tomorrow I've got that important meeting, so I must get a good night's sleep. And of course, that's the night now they can't sleep. Why? Because they're demanding it of themselves. And I think there's an idea here, John, where when you say sort of the overthinking of, will I get that job? If you have some must tendencies of like, I have to get this job and I must find out and I have to, it's likely there's going to be a lot of tension involved in that whole frame, and the masturbatory thinking is going to be coming up a lot, and the needing to know, like, I must find out. If you look at a lot of anxiety when lockdown first happened, and I ran a corona anxiety support group, and it was, ironically, I thought we'll do a 12-week support group because, in theory, it was 12 weeks of lockdown. And, that's laughable now, isn't it? Looking back at what happened. But all of the questions that people were saying about why they were anxious, it all pointed towards them needing guarantees. Like they'd say things like, if I knew that I would survive, if I know that my job will be okay, if I know that financially we'll be okay, if I know that I won't get COVID, or if I did, I'll be okay, then it would be all right. If I knew or had the guarantee it's only 12 weeks, then I'd be okay. In other words, it's like I must have certainty in order for me to function. And if we're demanding that we must know and have like these guarantees, we have nowhere to go but anxiety. And I think it's like that with the job. It's like, I must know immediately whether I've got this job. I have to find out. I have to have it. That's kind of one of the things that's interesting. I'm probably not going to say your name correctly. I'm going to add it here. I'm going to have a go. Voyage. I'm really sorry. I might have totally mullered that name, but there we go. I did my best. He says, yes, but most of the time it's really difficult to describe the feeling. Right. Yeah, it can be. So, and I think this goes back to what we were saying about describing the sensations specifically of a feeling. Even in your head, paying attention to it and the component parts, even if you don't verbalize it, can still help. Even if you don't have the word for it, you can kind of go, well, I have a sense of something here and a different sense of something here. That can be useful instead of just labeling it as anxiety. It's getting really specific in your own awareness, whether or not you label it outwardly. So that and of course practice. Some people aren't able to describe the feelings because they've just lumped anxiety as one whole thing. But if you stop and you begin to reflect on it, then yeah, that's kind of useful. Greg says, here we go. I like the idea. I think this was about unplugging anxiety. But if I've broken down to a sobbing wreck really quickly, it's hard to think rationally. Yeah, can be. But this is one of those things where practice makes perfect. And if you get into the habit more regularly of beginning to go, I'm just experiencing the thought, and you begin to get good at that, your brain begins to understand the pattern. So you find that you get quicker at it, and the brain gets better at recognizing thought as just thought. So yeah, practice uh, makes perfect. Emma says, I was never and have never been anxious about COVID. Bizarre, really. Not bizarre. That's also I've found a lot of people and come across a lot of people who have said exactly that. Like, and I think there was something about it normalized anxiety. Solid try. Thanks. Yes, he was telling me that my solid try for his name was a good effort. I apologize. I did muller it. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I think what happened is it normalized anxiety. And I had a lot of people, given the work that know about the work that I do, being a specialist with anxiety, who said to me when COVID hit, "Oh wow, you must be like raking it in because like everyone's anxious." But no. And I think what happened is this, and I spoke to a number of colleagues who work in the same industry as well, is people seem to reach out with anxiety when they know they shouldn't be anxious. As in, they know that either anxiety is intrusive into their life, or it's something that they shouldn't be feeling anxious, but they are. So again, I know the little dog can't hurt me, but I'm terrified of it. And it kind of seems like this is a ridiculous thing to be anxious about. Or I know statistically flying is the safest form of transport, but I'm still afraid, right? Or I know rationally that I've done really wonderful things in my life, but I can't shake that feeling of I'm worthless. So it's that kind of knowing that it's irrational. They shouldn't have it. The problem with COVID and a world pandemic is that people with anxiety suddenly was like, there were people going, well, I have anxiety, but I guess that's kind of normal because like there's a pandemic on. I should be feeling this way. Anxiety seemed like the appropriate response. And lots of people who have struggled with anxiety suddenly were like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. Look all around me, all of these people, we're all anxious now. And there was some kind of community of shared understanding of we're all going through it. And I think that is something that a lot of people who, bizarrely enough, have tendencies towards anxiety actually were okay with it. Also, people were going out less. So people with social anxiety were like, shouldn't really say this, should I? But I've quite enjoyed lockdown. There was I don't have to go out and interact in the same way. X, I like it, the mystery man or woman. What's the best way to deal with anxiety, muscle tension, and pain? Relax. Now, in all seriousness, earlier on in this, the live, we talked about not responding to sensations as a threat. I think if you have a sensation, it's unpleasant, but you interpret it as a threat, there's likely to be lots more like tension, and you're going to get more tense. It's going to add to the tension. Being willing to have some discomfort actually is likely to put you into a frame of mind where it's likely to go quicker. Okay, so I listen. I love doing this. I love doing this and just chatting and talking, as I would call talking shop. But sharing these ideas with people, and even if there's just one little nugget or one little idea that's just caused you to go, oh yeah, maybe I will try and stop mandating to myself that I have to think positive, or maybe I'll get curious about specifically like what's the thought process just before I get anxious. That would be great. And again, like, subscribe, share to people that would be interested in all this. I'm really, really pleased that for those who tuned in live and have shared, I always appreciate it, especially this first one. And hopefully, there was a few things with it. I'm using some technology called Ecamm Live. I've never used it before for a YouTube live. So yeah, this idea of like putting stuff on the screen. So there we go. There we go. Good luck with expanding your channel. Yes, yeah. I hope so. I've got lots of ideas. One of my next one that I'm about to write tomorrow, and then film next week, put out, is one on, do I suffer with anxiety? Because I always talk about myself as an ex-anxiety sufferer, and I want to share some ideas around, like, what do I say to that? Because people go, well, so you're saying you never have anxiety then? And no, of course, I'm normal, I'm human, I do have some anxiety, but I don't suffer with it. And there is a difference. And I want to go into that as well. No, John, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for wishing me luck and thanking me for this. I really do appreciate you turning up on a Thursday evening and so on. But yeah, absolutely. And look, the plan is to do these as the last Thursday of every month, as a minimum, and I might pop on now and then as well at other times. So thanks for tuning in, and yeah, all the best. If you have any questions, by the way, that you want me to bring up in future lives, just drop them in the comments below, or send me a message. Or check out my website, rapidchange.works. And yeah, always happy to answer the questions that you need answering. And oh, I forgot. Look at that. I rigged it up so I could do a special subscribe button, and I forgot to use it. There we go. So there it is. There's the subscribe button. Now take it off the screen. And also, I could have done some music in the background, which I forgot about. But there we go. Anyway, that'll be next time. It will refine and so on. So hope you're all okay. Have good times and be well.